May the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beings everywhere. So, continuing the study of Holy Mother's life, we come to a section on Swami Saradananda, who we've already learned was one of Mother's most devoted caretakers and servants. He was remarkable in even his audacity. When he discovered it was difficult for Mother to rent places and live there successfully because of the difficulties of all renters, all that kind of situation, because of all the people coming and going and so on. He did something that was very unusual for a monk. He borrowed a large sum of money. And with that, he created the offices of what is now, it was then and is now, the Bodhin magazine. It was also an office for himself. But on the second floor of that building, he created a very nice living situation for Mother when she was in Kolkata. And so though she felt, she said, because her life in Jairambati was so free and easy, she felt when she was staying in Kolkata, she said she felt like a bird in a cage. But she came and she served the devotees and people had remarkable experiences coming and touching her feet, including Swami Prabhavananda, my teacher. Swami Saradananda. Once when the master's disciples were young, Sharat, later Swami Saradananda, and said to Yogananda, I do not always understand what Naren, later Vivekananda, means. I do not always understand what Naren means. He talks about many things. Whenever he speaks about something, he does it with such emphasis that all his other statements become practically meaningless. Of course, this was true of Vivekananda, particularly when he was young. Before he became older, he referred to himself in his younger days as a fanatic. He said he was a fanatic. And so I'm not surprised that Swami Saradananda, later Swami Saradananda, now Sharat, felt that way. Jogin replied, let me tell you something, Sharat. You stick to Mother. Whatever she says is right. And of course, that was later Swami Yogananda's very definite feeling, was that Mother was the fountain of truth and reassurance. When Swami Trigunatitananda left for America on 27 September 1902, Saradananda took over responsibility for Holy Mother and continued serving her until she passed away in 1920. So for 18 years, Swami Saradananda was her devoted caregiver. Many years earlier at Dakshineshwar, Ramakrishna one day sat upon Saradananda's lap in an ecstatic mood. He later explained to the curious devotees he was testing to see how much weight he could bear. He said to Saradananda at the time, I'm seeing whether you can hold my weight. The young disciple passed his guru's test. In later years, despite his heavy responsibilities as General Secretary of the Ramakrishna Order, and let me just pause to say, because this was a period of great expansion of the order, Swami Brahmananda was at Swami Vivekananda's insistence and constant encouragement. Swami Brahmananda was opening centers throughout the subcontinent, particularly in the south and further north. So when it says heavy responsibilities as General Secretary, you can imagine raising money, dispensing money, keeping track of the money, working with the trustees to make decisions and carrying out those decisions. So this was Saradananda. And he did that. He did not live at Belramat. He lived over there in Kolkata at the Udbodhan office while he was doing all this. So there was a constant flow back and forth of brahmacharis bringing him messages and taking messages back from him and so on. So despite his heavy responsibilities as General Secretary of the Ramakrishna Order, he took charge of Holy Mother's day-to-day affairs, making sure there was enough food, making sure there was flowers for the shrine. All these things, he didn't do them personally, of course, but he saw that people did take care of them. Saradananda often referred to himself as the gatekeeper of her Kolkata home. He took responsibility for the mother's food and lodging, looked after her health, and he did. He was very attentive to her health. And so much so that sometimes mother actually complained of it. Oh, he's poking that stick at me. By that she meant a thermometer when she would have a fever and so on. He's making me use that stick. So he took responsibility for the mother's food and lodging, looked after her health, managed her household. There were many people coming and going. Gaurima, Golapma, Yoginma, they all lived with her from time to time, and some of them quite regularly. So that's what he means by a household. And there were brahmacharis that were tasked with looking after her. So he managed her health, her household, cared for her relatives, handled her financial needs, directed her visitors and devotees, and arranged for her travels. He also built a home for her in Calcutta. While Holy Mother was in Jairambati, he sometimes traveled there to manage her finances or care for her when she was ill. And Mother, because of her heavy responsibilities and her tireless work, was ill from time to time. Even if she wasn't always ill with some particular disease, she had the things that persisted from her youth, the rheumatism in her legs and knees and so on. And so she was rarely what you would call comfortable. He also settled, oh, this is something. I don't know how much detail it'll go into, but he also settled the complicated problems of her family members and had a home built for her in Jairambati where she could move about freely. Before that, she was having to live with her two brothers, and it was a constant irritation. She didn't complain, but nevertheless, it was, and the brothers complained and were constantly after her for money. She would receive money from devotees, and they always were overestimating how much she was getting and quarreling about how much they should get and so because they were taking care of her, that is, letting her live in their houses. So Saradananda built a home for her in Jairambati where she could move about freely, and she did too. And she had so many devotees and disciples. Like a dutiful and dependable son, Saradananda tried his utmost to make Holy Mother happy and comfortable. To him, the mother came first before everything else in this world. Imagine, with all his responsibilities. He was responsible for publishing the Udbodhan magazine, as well as the general secretary. He was working on the master's biography, which was later published as The Great Master in English. And that was a constant effort on his part. He wanted to make sure that before the people who knew the master moved away or passed away or became otherwise inaccessible, that he researched the facts about the master's life. And he was as good as the best journalist. We use the word triangulation now. Journalists use the word triangulation, making sure that they have three independent witnesses, three independent testimonies about something before they judge it's true. I don't know whether that was a journalistic practice in India, but it was something that Saradananda practiced when he was researching the master's life. He would make sure that there were three people who had no ability to discuss and come to agreements about what happened. He would find out. And if he couldn't get independent verification this way, there are some important parts of the master's life that he couldn't get that kind of truth about. And so it was left out. There's another biography written in verse. I forget the name of it now. It'll come to me now or later. I have a copy here, I can look it up. In any event, it was written by one of the disciples, Sri Ramakrishna's direct disciples, a poet. And there are many incidents in that book that the poet himself witnessed, and other people who witnessed it weren't available to Saradananda. So there's many incidents in the master's life, particularly when he was away from Dakshineshwar and away from Kumarpukur, that are in that book. To him, the mother came first before everything else in this world. In fact, his life is a glowing example of complete dedication to service. Just so you'll know, I don't think it's mentioned here. Sri Ramakrishna said that two of his monastic disciples had been direct disciples of Christ. He never said what their names were. At least it's not in the written tradition. It may be in the oral tradition. But the two were Swami Sharadananda and Swami Ramakrishnananda. These were the two that the master said had been direct disciples of Christ. So it's not really a surprise. It's always a marvel, something to take note of and find remarkable. But it isn't really surprising that Saradananda was this way, having also been a direct disciple of Christ. In fact, Saradananda's life is a glowing example of complete dedication to service. Holy Mother once said, "I shall be able to live in Calcutta as long as Sharat is there. I do not see anyone who can be responsible for me after that. Sharat can in every respect. He is the man to bear my burden." And this is the weight that Sri Ramakrishna was saying. Of course, Sri Ramakrishna foreknew all of this stuff. All of that was what was going to happen. And so it wasn't so much that he and Holy Mother are not two beings, they're one being in two forms. So this is what the mother meant by her burden. Someone asked, what about Swami Premananda? No, he can't do it, but he runs Belur Math. That may be. The questioner responded, but he runs Belur Math. That may be, but looking after women is a bother. What about Swami Premananda? And Swami Premananda Baburam was quite a remarkable man, and he did indeed run Belur Math. No, Mother said, he can't do it, but he runs Belur Math. That may be, but looking after women is a bother. He can only keep an eye on me from a distance. And that was also true of Brahmananda. Brahmananda made sure that there was always plenty in the way of finances. And he was the president of the order. From 1902 to 1920, Sharadananda's life was intertwined with Holy Mother's. What a grace, huh? What a grace. For those 18 years, 1902 to 1920, Sharadananda's life was intertwined with the Holy Mother's. This period is recorded in detail in this book. But here we shall record, this period is recorded in 1902 to 1920. This period is recorded in detail in this book, but here we shall record some significant events that affected Sharadananda directly. When Sharadananda began looking after Holy Mother, he was upset that she had no place of her own in Calcutta or in Jairambati. In Calcutta, she lived either in a rented house or, when disciples could not find a suitable house for her, in a devotee's home. She stayed at Balaram's place often before she got a place of her own. She was very shy and modest. She was very shy and modest. So it was difficult to be a guest in a household or devotee's house and witness the family quarrels and frivolous activities, or join them in sickness and grief. And now, why would it be so difficult? Because her heart was so huge. She could not, all of these things affected her. Her shyness, her modesty was a boundary because she was so sensitive and everything affected her so deeply. Moreover, she suffered from malaria from time to time. Oh, this is a terrible aspect of Mother's life. She got that malaria early on and it kept coming back. They had no treatment for it in those days. Moreover, she suffered from malaria from time to time and could not bear the thought of becoming a burden to others. Regardless of whether she stayed with a devotee family or in a rented house, it was inconvenient for her to be frequently changing lodgings. Realizing Holy Mother's uncomfortable situation, Saradananda was determined to build a permanent home for her in Calcutta. In July 1906, Kedar Chandra Das donated a small piece of land on Gopal Yogi Lane, Bagh Bazar, for building a publication house for Udbodhan, the official Bengali journal of the Ramakrishna order. So a devotee donated the land. Previously, the publication house was located in, could you say that word, Balakrishna? Located in Girinderlal Vasak's house. But that devotee died in 1906. It was suggested that they build a tiled shed on the donated plot, but Sharadananda decided to build a brick house instead. His plan was to use the first floor for the publication office with a shrine to the master, and the second floor as living quarters for Holy Mother and her companions. Toward the end of 1907, depending on the master's grace, Sharadananda undertook responsibility for the building project. The publication fund had 2,700 rupees, which was consumed by the construction of the building's foundation. If you can imagine, it took 2,700 rupees, which was a lot of money in those days, to build the foundation. Sharadananda borrowed a total of 5,700 rupees from different devotees, but this was still not enough. Finally, some distinguished devotees came forward to fund the project. The building, known as Udbodhan House, has 10 rooms, 6 on the first floor, 3 on the second floor, and 1 on the third floor. By the end of 1908, the Udbodhan office had moved into its new house. See chapter 29 for more details on Udbodhan House. So in 2 years, which was moving fast in those days, particularly considering all of his other responsibilities, Sharadananda had created that building. And for him to borrow 5,700 rupees, as I said, this was unusual indeed for a monk. Holy Mother was not in Bug Bazaar for the opening ceremony of Udbodhan House. In 1908, she went to Kamarpukur to attend the festivities celebrating the anniversary of Ramakrishna's birth, arranged by Swami Yoga Vinod of Kankurgachi, a disciple of Ramachandra Datta. Following the festivities, she went to Jairambati, where she lived with her brother's joint family. Brothers is the two brothers at that time lived together. Their mother, Shamasundari, had died in 1906, and Holy Mother had become her brother's guardian, which is a bit of a reversal, as we know, in Indian culture. By late 1908, her brothers were grown and married, and they had begun to quarrel over their share of the family property. They had tremendous respect for Sharadananda, so Holy Mother asked him to help divide up their inheritance. On 23 March 1909, Sharadananda left for Jairambati with Yogananda, Golapma, and Brahmachari Gyanananda. Brahmachari Gyanananda. That's unusual. Later, Swami Bhumananda. To fulfill Holy Mother's request. The train reached Vishnupur in the afternoon. They left for Jairambati that evening in 2 bullock carts, arriving the next day before noon, which was relatively quick in those days, which means they just kept moving. They didn't stop, or if they did, just very briefly. Sharadananda bowed down to the mother, and she blessed him by touching his head and chin. This was her way of kissing him. This is the Bengali mother's way of giving a motherly kiss. Holy Mother was extremely busy in Jairambati. Apart from her daily duties, she cooked a couple of dishes for Sharadananda and the others. Apart from her daily duties, which were numerous, she cooked a couple of dishes for Sharadananda and the others. In the evening, Sharadananda talked to the villagers about the master and spiritual life. He knew that arbitration takes time, so he carried Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga with him to edit. He was always working. There was just no rest for Sharadananda. He knew that arbitration takes time, so he carried Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga with him to edit. For those of you who aren't familiar, Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga is the lectures that he delivered in London in 1895. That's primarily, there's some other bits and pieces, but it's primarily made of the lectures that he gave in London in 1895. And they're really quite remarkable because they came after that Nirvikalpa Samadhi realization that he'd had at Thousand Island Park in June of 1895. So he was in a very elevated, it was beyond mood. It was a state of being where he was speaking from. If you read the talks, you'll see what I mean. We'll take up, by the way, when we finish the Gita, which we'll do that soon, on Wednesday night, we're going to take up Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga. So because Saradananda knew that arbitration takes time, he carried Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga with him to edit. The arbitrators, Swami Sharadananda, Sharada Prasad Chattopadhyay, okay, of Tajpur, and
Shambhu Chandrai.
Okay.
Chandrai of Gita.
Okay, were selected with the approval of Holy Mother's brothers. Kedarnath Datta of Kualpura, later Swami Keshavananda, is that right? Keshavananda came to measure the family homestead and farmland. That probably means that Kedarnath Datta was a surveyor, because they wouldn't have asked somebody who was inexpert to do that. So they came to measure the family homestead and farmland. Swami Bhumananda recalled, it took several days to measure the dwelling places and the farmlands. All documents were in Uncle Kali's possession. Uncle Prashana wanted to see those documents, but Uncle Kali would not share them. One day, Sharat Maharaj went to Kali's house to hand out the documents according to the distribution of the property. He secretly told me to guard the documents because he knew the nature of the mother's brothers. So the Swami, Bhumananda, he may have been a brahmachari at that time, he secretly told me to guard the documents because he knew the nature of mother's brothers, who were really quite quarrelsome. She said she'd never be born in that family again. Sharat Maharaj sat on a mat on Kali's veranda, and I stood behind Prasanna. Kali opened the iron safe and brought out all of the documents, placing them in front of Maharaj. He began to scrutinize the documents. Meanwhile, Yoganma said, Sharat, the mother wants to talk to you. Immediately, Maharaj got up and told Prasanna, Uncle, don't touch these documents. I shall check them when I come back. Maharaj gave me a look and I understand what he meant. As soon as Maharaj left, Prasanna began to quarrel with Kali. Prasanna jumped up and grabbed the documents. I stopped him from leaving, but the brothers began to pull at the documents. Sharat Maharaj heard the noise and returned. Prasanna placed the documents in front of him. Finally, Sharat Maharaj distributed the documents. Later, Sharat Maharaj told us, look at us. Some are monks of 25 years and some of 30 years. We become extremely angry for a little offense. Now look at the Holy Mother, how she is forbearing all these things. Now, when Sharat said that, later Sharat Maharaj told us, look at us. Some are monks of 25 years and some of 30 years. We become extremely angry for a little offense. And I've seen evidence of this, even at Bellarmont in 1999. So Sharat Maharaj was talking about a reality, not just being somehow falsely self-accusatory or modest. Now look at the mother, how she is forbearing all these things. Faced by her brother's erratic behavior, the mother remains calm, serene, and unperturbed. This is, Swami Vivekananda remarked that this is because she lived here. She did not live as an ordinary human being. She looked like an ordinary human being in terms of her appearance and her clothing and so on. But her behavior was that of an illumined soul living from a different place than any of us can really imagine. And that's why she was able to do that. The mother remains calm, serene, and unperturbed. She very rarely lost her temper. And she really had to be provoked before she would be outspoken or act in an angry way. The arbitrators discussed the whole affair for many days and finally settled the matter. It was decided that the property and legal documents would be divided among the brothers. According to the local law of the time, sons inherit their father's property, but daughters inherit the husband's property. As she lived with her parents and brothers in Jairambati, even after her marriage, Holy Mother had her own cottage. So Sharada Babu asked her which of the brothers' houses she would prefer to live in. He wanted to be sure that her cottage was allotted to the brother whom she preferred. Holy Mother had intense renunciation, and she said that she would live in another person's household like a snake lives in a rat hole. Now, I don't exactly know what that means. A rat hole can't be very commodious for something as big as a snake. So Holy Mother had intense renunciation and said she would live in another person's household like a snake lives in a rat hole. When Sharada Babu insisted on a decision, she replied, some days I shall live in Prasanna's house and some days in Kali's. Sharada Babu was prudent and he knew the nature of her brothers. He put Holy Mother's cottage in Prasanna's share of the family estate. The documents were executed and duly registered in the court at Kotalpur. When the brothers took possession of their respective shares, Holy Mother was greatly relieved. Years later, when the number of Holy Mother's devotees began to grow, Sharadananda had another house built in 1916 for Holy Mother in Jairambati. It was just 4 years before her death. So from the time that the settlement was made until 1916, she lived in these brothers' houses. I'll never know how. I mean, they were such quarrelsome, difficult people and constantly grasping after her money. It wasn't her money. She didn't never regarded it as her money, but the money she was given by devotees. They constantly overestimated how much she was given. They thought that she was being given abundance, and so they felt she was being stingy with what she gave them. On Friday, 21 May 1909, Holy Mother left Jairambati for Calcutta via Vishnupur. She was then 56 years old. 4 bullock carts were hired, one for Holy Mother and her 2 nieces, Radhu and Maku, one for Yoganma and Golapma, one for Sharadananda, and one for Brahmachari Gyanananda, and a devotee from Jairambati named Ashutosh. The party stopped briefly at Koalpura in the afternoon and then resumed their journey in the evening. There was a small monastery at Koalpura. I don't know, I think it had been built by that time. At 10 o'clock, they bought some food from a shop in Kotalpur for supper and ate it on the veranda of a Shiva temple. The party reached an inn at Jaipur in the morning. The party reached an inn at Jaipur in the morning. They had an early lunch, rested, and then continued to the Vishnupur railway station. That evening, Holy Mother and her women companions boarded an interclass car. I don't know what that means. What is an interclass car? There's first class, second class, third class. Does that mean second class, third class, or first class, second class? What's
No, this is after the second class. Second class is the...
No. It was between first and second.
It was
between second and third. After the second class, between second and third.
That's just what Balakrishna said.
Yeah, the same. But I'm not sure whether it was between first and second or second or third.
Well, in any event.
Well, there is a footnote there. It is after the second class is the third, the inter.
Okay. Okay. Sharadananda and the others traveled third class. They reached Calcutta the next morning. On Sunday, 23rd May, 1909, Holy Mother entered her new living quarters in Udbodhan House, which is now called Mayarbari, or Mother's House. So it wasn't until the 23rd of May of 1909 that Mother, but still that she had a good bit to live, 11 more years to live. And so many things, as we'll hear, so many things happened at Mayarbari, or Mother's House. So on that day, she entered her new living quarters. Sharadananda's joy knew no bounds when he saw that Holy Mother had entered her own home. Now, if we can just imagine Sharadananda, this monk, so devoted, so austere in his ways. His joy knew no bounds when he saw that Holy Mother had entered her own home. Although it was not a fancy house, it was very convenient for her to bathe in the Ganges, which of course she wanted to do every morning, and which she did at 3 a.m. That's when she would go for privacy's sake. She would go in what we would regard as the dead of night. She would rise. At that time, there were no huts in front of the house, but only an open field. From the rooftop, Holy Mother could see the domestic cattle grazing in the field and she could see Ganges to the west, bordered by tall deodar trees. Now, I don't know if most of you know deodars. They're beautiful, beautiful trees. We were so fortunate in Glendale, California, when I lived in Glendale, California from September of 1976 until I left to come here. There was a deodar in our front yard. It was over 60 feet tall by the time that house was sold. Beautiful, stately tree. They're a Himalayan tree, but they grow nicely in other climes. That's why I was able to grow in Glendale, California, Southern California. So those are beautiful trees. So Mother had a beautiful view, the cows grazing in the field, the Ganges bordered by tall deodar trees. From one particular spot, she could even see the pinnacles of the Dakshineshwar temple, which brought back many sweet memories to her. As she would say, it fills my heart with a picture of bliss. Fills my heart with a picture of bliss. A few weeks after arriving at Bodhan house, Holy Mother contracted chickenpox. Oh, in those days, no treatment for it at all. A few weeks after arriving at Bodhan house, Holy Mother contracted chickenpox. The Brahmin priest of the Shitala temple in Bagh Bazar treated her with naturopathy every day, and she always bowed down to him. One day an attendant told her not to bow down to such an ordinary priest, who might not have good character. Holy Mother replied, "My child, he is a Brahmin after all. One should have respect for Brahminical garb. The master did not destroy any rules or customs." Does this remind those of us of Christian training of anything? Christ said, "I have not come to break the law, but to fulfill the law." The mother said, the master did not destroy any rules or customs. When Holy Mother had recuperated from her illness, Sharadananda arranged for her sightseeing, and she visited the Parswanath
Prasnath Jaina temple.
Jaina temple, also a Jain temple, and Tankurgachi
Yogodhyana
in Calcutta, and
Yogodhyana in Calcutta.
And next word,
Ramarajatala.
Ramarajatala and
Navagopal's house
in Howrah. Howrah is on the same side of the Ganges as the Belramat, isn't it? Howrah. Lalit Chadupadhyaya, one of the mother's disciples, provided his horse carriage. Yogan Ma and Golap Ma accompanied her on these sightseeing. So Mother got to see the environs around where she was living. On 12 September 1909, so about 5 months or after she moved in, Holy Mother went to see Girish's play. Please say the words.
Pandav Gaurav.
Pandav Gaurav went to see Girish's play Pandav Gaurav at the Minerva Theater. Not the Star Theater, but apparently another of his theaters. While watching the play and listening to the song, Hera Hara
Manmohani.
Hera Hara Manmohini, she went into samadhi On that day, Girish Ghosh performed the role of
Panchuki.
Panchuki, an elderly minister of a king. On another occasion, Holy Mother went to hear kirtan at
Datta's house.
Kirandatta's house at Bag Bazar. The time of the kirtan was Radha's separation from Krishna. Oh, the theme of the
Yeah.
kirtan. The theme of the kirtan was Radha's separation from Krishna. At the end of the kirtan, Holy Mother went into ecstasy and lost body consciousness. Now, we have to remember much earlier, shortly after the Master's death, Holy Mother went to Vrindavan and she said, everything is just as it was. She remembered being Radha. The Master said she was Radha. She remembered being Radha. So the theme of the kirtan was Radha's separation from Krishna, which was, of course, Radha just came to pieces. At the end of the kirtan, Holy Mother went into ecstasy and lost body consciousness. Golak Ma cautiously held her up and took her to the carriage. After arriving at Ubodan, an attendant began to repeat, Ma, Ma. I'm pausing just so we can imagine this scene. The mother is at a kirtan. The theme of the kirtan is Radha's separation from Krishna. Mother, remembering, being present to all of that, loses consciousness. Golap Ma cautiously held her up and took her to the carriage. After arriving at Ubodan, an attendant, one of the brahmacharis, began to repeat, Ma, Ma. Gradually she regained normal consciousness and replied, yes, my son. Golap Ma began to live with Holy Mother in Ubodan and became her full-time attendant. Now, remember, the Master said that these women who were so close to Holy Mother had been gopis in Vrindavan at the time of Krishna and Radha and had asked for a special dispensation to be born along with Mother in this incarnation. And so this is how we can think of Golapma. She was formerly a gopi associated with Radha in Vrindavan and came again with Mother. Golapma began to live with Holy Mother in Ubodan and became her full-time attendant. She and Radhu's mother shared a room adjacent to Holy Mother's room. Now that was an austerity because Radhu's mother was crazy. She was a difficult person. She and Radhu's mother shared a room adjacent to Holy Mother's room. Yoganma came twice a day to give the cook rice, lentils, and other cooking supplies from the pantry, and also to help him chop the vegetables. After Vespers in the evening, Holy Mother sometimes asked Sharadananda to sing some songs. Now, it kind of glosses over after Vespers. You know, Holy Mother would arrange a lovely meal for the Master of what had been prepared by the cook and serve it to him at Arati. And then they would all partake of the prasad. So this was really some special moments. After Vespers in the evenings, Holy Mother sometimes asked Sharadananda to sing some songs. The Swami had a tanpura and drums in his office, which was a small room next to the building entrance. He played the drums and someone else played the tanpura. He sang some devotional songs, especially on the Divine Mother, to entertain the Mother. He was said to be a good singer, good musician. Providence sometimes provides difficulties to facilitate its own designs. This is a very careful way of saying this, so let's listen up. Providence sometimes provides difficulties to facilitate its own designs, and Sharadananda experienced this situation. He had borrowed money from devotees to complete Udbodhan House in Calcutta, but could not pay the interest on the loan. He was embarrassed because he could not keep his word. He had few alternatives, so he decided to write the life of the master to pay off the loan. With the permission and blessing of Holy Mother, Sharadananda began to write Sri Sri Ramakrishna Lila Prasanga, which has been translated into English as Sri Ramakrishna and his Divine Play. It was also earlier translated as the Great Master. So with the Holy Mother's permission and blessing, Sharadananda began to write Sri Sri Ramakrishna Lila Prasanga. Lila, of course, is the Divine Play of the Master, which has been translated into English as Sri Ramakrishna and his Divine Play. And it's Swami Chaitanananda is being modest here. That's his translation and his title. He later described the adverse conditions under which he wrote the Lila Prasanga. Holy Mother was living upstairs along with Radhu. I was surrounded by devotees, and I had to keep the accounts also, as he was general secretary. Not only keep the accounts of the order, but keep the accounts of the magazine also. The burden of the loan for the house was on me. I used to write the Lila Prasanga sitting in the small room downstairs. Then nobody dared to talk to me, as I had no time to chat for a long time. There are stories about this. Swami, if you ever get a chance to talk to Swami Atmarupananda, talk to Atmarupananda about this. Then nobody dared talk to me, as I had no time to chat for a long time. Swami Atmarupananda lived and worked for a long time. He's now in Houston. He'll come to visit us again when we can have visitors. And we'll poke him some evening to tell us about these things. But he lived at Belramat for a long time and made it his business to collect these oral recollections of these occurrences around the direct disciples. If anybody would ask anything, I would say, be quick and finish the talk briefly. People would think that I was egotistic. I could not write much about the devotees except Gopalma and Vivekananda. I could not write much about the devotees except Gopalma and Vivekananda because there was so much material to write about the master. When the mind was ready, only then could I write. And he used to write into the wee hours of the morning. He didn't sleep much. How are we doing for time?
5 more minutes.
Okay. Let's just take a little time, then we'll just break there. Any comments, questions, anything anyone would like to say about what we've read? This has been a lot. We've read a lot without a break here, but we can take time now for anything you'd like to say or ask.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, Sean.
what I want to ask you is, why did the relatives of Holy Mother not see any divinity in her when all others realize her to be the avatar?
Well, this was the way she wanted it in Jairambati. She did not, her shyness and modesty was, as I said earlier, something of a boundary that she was setting so that she wouldn't be constantly pestered. So she said, and we may discover it later in the book, although I don't think so, because I think we kind of passed that part by. But she said she deliberately pulled a veil over herself. Not just a physical veil, but we'd say in English, she pulled the wool over their eyes. But she did find that family into which she'd been born very difficult and said she would never be born in that family again. Those two brothers, particularly Kali and Prasanna, they were greedy, they were quarrelsome by nature, and so virtually no one in Jairambati saw her for who she was. There were a couple of women who recognized her for who she was. And when there weren't devotees from Calcutta and other, they were her close companions. After a time, after the place, her own place was built, and Saradananda could arrange it for it, some of the brahmacharis from the Kualpura monastery, that was the closest monastery to Jairambati, some of the brahmacharis would be tasked to help care for Mother. And the villagers were constantly amazed that there were these monks coming to take care of her, and that, all these influential and important people, as well as many, many other kinds of people, all kinds of classes. But of course, that didn't signify as much to them as these people of wealth and influence that came to see Holy Mother. And how she still behaved like an ordinary village woman with them. She would look after them like any village woman of that time would look after her guests. So she never gave any hint of her divinity, except to some very few people she would reveal herself. So it was her will that it be so shown.
Thank you. Thank you.
Brother Shankara?
Actually, it was the Prasanna Mai is the one who, she recognized that about the mother. And if I remember correctly, Swami Yogananda, he tells one of the brothers, go, she is the mother of the universe, go pray. But still, he did not listen.
No, it was just their sister.
Yeah.
And others just saw her, she's just my aunt, Well, that's, as I say, this was a boundary that Mother was setting. She wanted it that way. I mean, if we stop and ponder for a few moments what it must be like, in our limited way we can get some inkling, what it must be like for the divine being to incarnate as a human being. You remember when Sri Ramakrishna at Dakshineshwar, his body began to take on a golden hue and a radiance. And people began to come just to see, like a circus attraction. And he prayed to Kali Ma. He prayed to the Mother, oh, Mother, withdraw this. I don't want to become a carnival attraction. And she did. So it's that same sense. You were going to say something, Swayam?
Yes, Brother Shankara, I was going to ask if there is anywhere any explanation as to why Holy Mother incarnated in that kind of a family. In Sri Ramakrishna's, his parents were both very pious and they had this divine vision that, God was going to be born as their son. So is there anything like that in Holy Mother's life story?
Well, her mother was very sweet, mostly, and pious, I guess you'd say, as village people were in those days. There aren't any of these stories about her death or her birth being foretold in this way. But certainly she was a very special girl from the beginning. And, who knows? Who knows? Perhaps at the end of this book, I know that Chaitanananda always likes to sum up. He may have something to say about that. I don't know that. It's been a long time since I read the book. I don't remember. I read it when it first came out, so I don't really remember all the bits and pieces. But there doesn't seem to be any thing that I know of that explains Mother's birth in this way.
Thank you, Rajan.
And thanks for asking the question. It's a very appropriate question. Shailesh, do you know anything about that at all?
I think it must have been mentioned somewhere, but it got lost. Just to coming back to the question, her father and mother, they both were very pious, very spiritually elevated souls. There is no question and there is no doubt about that. And I'm sure her mother, she had some experiences, but they probably never got that kind of attention what Sri Ramakrishna's parents got.
Uh-huh. Yes.
And looking back at the brothers, even brothers of Sri Ramakrishna one of them was elevated, but not the whole family. I mean, we have Ruday in his family and some other people. So mother's brothers were just quite ordinary in the sense. I think that divinity does not pass along the siblings, I guess.
Yeah, but she did actually pass the remark in some asperity one time, some annoyance that she would not be born in that family again. That they were just too troublesome. Thank you, Shailesh. Anything else from anyone?
Oh, Brother Shankar, this is Haima.
Yes, Haima?
I'm just saying, just a comment. It can happen if a mother has 3 children, they are not all going to be so spiritual and devoted to,
True.
There is a saying in Sanskrit in India, it's a Pandita Putraha Suntaha. Even a Pandit can have not very intelligent son. He could be Sunta, he could be very, Sunta means, I think, mischievous, not intelligent, very dumb. So this is like a mother was very dedicated, spirited person born into that family. Other 2 were not. They didn't have the divinity in their heart. To see the divinity in her, first you have to have some divinity, right? Some type of divinity in our heart, and love for themselves.
Yes.
It seems like the brothers didn't seem to have a lot of love for themselves. They couldn't see the love in her, divinity in her. That's just a comment I'm making.
Thank you, dear. That's right. Anything else? Okay, it's a little after 9. We'll leave it at that. we'll start with the sentence, Saradananda's service to Holy Mother is legendary in the Ramakrishna order. We'll start with that next week.
Brother Shankara, I just thought of another question if you have a minute.
Yes, please.
By any chance, again, is it declared anywhere if Sharadananda and Ramakrishnananda had any inkling that they had been disciples of Jesus, and if so, did that give them strength to forbear through all the difficulties?
I don't know about Sharadananda. I don't ever remember. Once again, the person to ask, and you can email him. You can email Atmarupananda. You can find him through the Houston Vedanta Society website. I think his email is just atmarupananda@gmail.com. You can email him such a question. But Ramakrishnananda, I think, did have some inkling of this. Something was there. He didn't practice spiritual disciplines. He didn't sit for meditation with the others. His path was service. When Vivekananda was urging them all to do their spiritual practices, what Ramakrishnananda was doing was creating and arranging the method of worship of the master. He was a pujari, great pujari. He was the one who looked after the brothers' physical needs. He was the one who made the beds. He was the one who washed the clothes. And so this great servicefulness, I'm sure it sprung from some realization of what he had been before. But I don't remember anything ever being said about Sharadananda having whether they had these revelations. I don't remember anything said about that. As I said, if we want to know more, we can ask Atmarupananda, and I encourage you to do so. He'll be responsive. He's a very sweet and loving monk. So if you email him about this, atmarupananda@gmail.com. I'm sure that's his email address. And just ask him these questions. And perhaps if you get an answer that you feel like you want to share with us, you can tell us.
Okay. Thank you, Brother Shankara. Thank you for taking the extra time.
Well, this is how we do this together. I noticed nobody else winked out. Everybody else was interested too. So this is what it means to practice the art of spirituality together. Anything else, dears? All right. Om Satoma Satkamaya. Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya. Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Abhiravir Moiti. O dearly beloved Lord, lead us from thy manifest, thy illusory reality, to thy absolute and eternal and changeless reality. Lead us from darkness and ignorance. Oh, lead us from darkness and ignorance to the brilliance of thy wisdom and love. Lead us from death to immortality. Light us through and through. Light us through and through with thy everlasting shining presence. Om, peace, peace. Peace be unto us and to all beings everywhere. So, until those of you who wish to join us tomorrow evening, as we're on chapter 17 of the Gita. As I said, after we finish the Gita, we'll take up Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga, which defines for us in a way that I've never seen anything come close to defining it as so well, is the nature of this manifest and illusory reality, the Sanskrit word for which is Maya. And just his talk, the real and the apparent man, is worth the price of admission, so to speak. So tomorrow evening, the Gita, Saturday morning at 11 o'clock, Realizing God, the book of the collection of Swami Prabhavananda's talks. And then on Sunday morning at 11, because the following day is Yom Kippur, a very holy day for the Jewish brethren and sisters, we will have a talk on the Baal Shem Tov, a great Jewish saint of the Middle Ages, the Baal Shem Tov and the practice of love, which will be the last of the talks on bhakti for this cycle. So, a great good night to you all. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai, Durga Durga Durga. Go in Mother's loving and protective embrace. So far, still none of our congregation, no one in our congregation has so far contracted the virus. So let us all hold a sweet and a powerful thought for the protection of everyone. Yes, may you be healthy and cheerful during this dreadful time. Good night.
Thank you, Brother Shankara.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Everybody.
Good night.